I can't come here and die. I can't come here and lose. Got all this shit on my mind. Like what the fuck I'ma do? Work ain't paid me in time. My bitch just ripping my mood. O2 just cut off my line.
Hi guys,
And welcome to the Echo Chamber.
I'm Jade.
And I'm Ez.
And today we're going to be talking about writing. So we obviously did the episodes with Nancy, which is one of my favourite episodes. I'm definitely biased though. So that was like nearly a year ago.
It was nowhere near a year ago.
Oh. I'm exaggerating then.
You were very much exaggerating.
Yeah, we're going to talk about writing. Being writers, the craft of writing is all the more relevant for us personally. And yeah, we just thought we'd just chop it up about writing. But first, opening question. So how was your week?
I'm mad in one word, very mad. And that I'm not going to get into it today because I'm still too triggered by the madness, and I'm still very much in the madness. But I'm in Nigeria currently, which is good in the ways. But yeah, my week was mad. How was yours?
My week's been really busy. I'm tired, but grateful, man. Grateful in the busyness and the tiredness, because as I always say, there was a time when nothing weren't going in. So should we change the opening question? Maybe at some stage in your life, one day, what is a story you'd like to tell? Or maybe even past, like, has there ever been a story that you wanted to tell?
I went on a course when I was probably like 14 or 15. It was at the Royal Court Theatre. It was a script writing course. And I wrote a scene in that time, and I worked with like professional script writers or whatever for screenplays. And yeah, there was like a group of us. We were all, I'm going to use the word troubled very tongue-in-cheek, but we were all troubled kids from around London. And I was picked for this course, and it was fantastic. And I would go to the Royal Court every day, and we'd have lunch in Sloane Square, and it was brilliant. I was probably 14 or 15. Off the back of my scene, I was picked. There was two of us that were picked. So it was a bigger group of maybe like 10. And then there were two of us that were picked to further develop that. And I fumbled the bag on that. So I can't remember how, but I just remember that I just wasn't committed in the way that I needed to be in order to kind of develop that into a full play. And over a period of a few years, I wrote that play. And that play sits on my laptop, and I haven't done anything with it. And I'm like even too anxious to open it often. And I looked back at it maybe last year, maybe the year before, and it's not as bad. Like I wasn't cringing as much as I thought I would. And it's definitely a story that I want to tell, and it's definitely a story that I want to develop, and it's definitely got so much room to be developed and to be worked. It needs to be worked on. But in terms of like the story and the themes, they're themes that are really important to me. It addresses mental health, it addresses mother-daughter relationship, and yeah, just themes that are really important to me. And I would really like to tell that story, and I will tell that story at some point in my life. How about you?
So I have always been really like struck by people's stories, like people's lives, even like the really minor details of people's lives. So like, what your mum does for a living, and like just really small things have always grabbed my attention, basically. The differences and the nuances in everyone's individual experiences. And so I have always been really interested in particularly the lives of us, like minoritized communities. So whether that's like ethnic, racial minority groups, working class groups, I've always been really interested in that. I would love to write an anthology that like just covers, I don't know, 12, 15 different people's stories from different age groups different backgrounds, but the common theme is that they'll all be working class and all from some type of minoritized community. But I would like to do that. I think that there is something really important in the story of one's life, existence, experience. I think it creates a level of empathy and understanding, and it also brings people together. I've always wanted to do that. So jumping in to today's episode, you're actually the one that suggested this. So we have like a shared document that we just like throw ideas in. We throw ideas in, and then we've got another section of the document where we have like collaborative episode ideas with people that we know or people that we may not know, but we've engaged with them in some capacity. Ez was actually the one that threw in an episode on being writers. You should lead by rights.
It's funny. I think that for both of us in our lives right now, this is, well, I'll speak for myself. I think that I, for a long time, wouldn't have described myself as a writer. I've always been a writer. I've always written. But I think that I was waiting for maybe some credentials or some, like, I don't know, something that felt more concrete to be able to describe myself with that adjective, and that thing hasn't come. But I'm still in this. It's funny. I was tweeting yesterday that I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship with writing, and I don't know who's the victim and who's the perpetrator. Yeah, I still write, and I still write, and it's still very central to what I do in terms of like, yeah, a lot of the ideas that I have around career and yada 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 involve writing. I'm in the process of co-writing a book. It has been a really difficult but interesting experience. Like in the past year, I would say I've been commissioned more. Like for that, basically in the past year, I've earned more money writing than I've ever earned. And that's not to say I've earned loads of money, but I've definitely feel like I'm more and more in a position where I can't run away from that label. I think I'm intrigued as to like why I've run away from the label, number one, for so long. And number two, like navigating that as well as like all the different hats that I wear. And I think there's something that we both have in common. Obviously, yeah, I think now being writers is something that's very like prominent in both of our lives. In ways that maybe it wasn't before. But also I think that it's something that we have both in our own ways run away from, or not being comfortable with, not engaged with, in ways that we might have in other kind of areas of our lives. So yeah, I thought we could have a conversation about that. And I think that I can speak for myself, a lot of my stuff is rooted in not necessarily feeling I had the freedom to be a writer. And I mean that maybe financially, or maybe like I was never going to go to uni and study writing to write books. And that was just never a path that felt accessible to me. And also the types of stories that I tell, or the types of, and again, like, and even that, like, increasingly I write less and less. I don't write fiction at all, really. So apart from this book that I'm writing, which is fiction, I don't write fiction. And again, that's because for me, I have steered away from what felt like a dream, what felt like this pipe dream of, oh, you can write stories and you can earn a living, because the types of stories that I'm telling aren't what I've seen to be like kind of mainstream, what people want to read, basically. And yeah, and I've been challenged by that of late. So yeah, I thought we could have a conversation about that, basically.
Boy, it's been a journey. There is a series by Murky Books, the How To series, and there's one called How to Write It, and the foreword is written by Candice Carty-Williams, and she was kind of like, the idea of being a writer, like affirming that she is an author, she's a writer, was kind of like always clouded by this archetype of an author and a writer, and that is somebody who like might listen to classical music and write like on a typewriter. And her experience was just so different. And she talks about the circumstances of like her writing Queenie, basically, and that like she definitely wasn't listening to classical music in her home office on a typewriter. She was very much like with a broken laptop, and it's, you know, all these other things, very opposite to the archetype. And I think that when I consider myself and my trajectory, it has been completely against the archetype. It makes me challenge the archetype firstly, but it also makes me kind of also think about maybe my self-esteem and maybe imposter syndrome as well. So it's kind of like I'm almost not allowed to consider myself an author or a writer because it just doesn't fit a narrative that I have. And I guess society upholds, but yeah, it just does not. It is like so opposite. It's so very different from what I have in my mind a writer is. And so that has taken me away from honing and like embracing the title of writer. And so I've done bare things. And so I guess having done bare different things with my life, that's been a positive, but also in some ways, I guess looking at my trajectory, it's also been somewhat negative.
I am an open book, as people that listen to this podcast will probably have gathered by now. I'm an open book, I'm an oversharer. Like, I can talk about most things openly and comfortably. I've learned to do that in a way that I don't feel exposed, or I don't feel like I've learned to do that in a way that feels comfortable for me, basically. So in conversation, or like I'm a facilitator, and that's what I do for a living mainly. When I'm holding workshops or running workshops, I share of myself, and I feel safe doing that. Up until date, there's not a single thing I have written that when I'm putting it out to be read by anybody, I don't feel an intense vulnerability around. It definitely is like imposter syndrome. It definitely is like other stuff, because I also can at the same time acknowledge that I write well, or I like I like my writing, I like what I put out. But even like down to like if I've written reports, or if I'm writing like internal reports for old organizations that I've used to work for, so not even necessarily things that are being published externally, even down to like it used to be, it's got a lot better, but my emails, like writing emails, there is something about, there just feels something so vulnerable in my relationship with words, and so final as well. Like when I'm talking, I can backpedal a bit, and there's a clumsiness that I have grace for in oral communication that I just don't in written words, sorry. It's like, if I'm writing this thing down, I better mean what I say. It can feel really burdensome. It can feel quite toxic at points. And I think I definitely hold myself to a higher standard than I hold other people to, because I scrutinize my words way more than I scrutinize. Like if I'm reading something that someone else has written, if I'm reading an article, I'm able to enjoy that a lot more than I enjoy the writing process. And it's interesting, like, because I'm also like, so why don't you just start writing? And then I've gone through long periods of time where that's what I do. I just won't write because it's so anxiety inducing. But somehow always find my way back to this craft, or always find my way back to like, no, I would like to write on this. I would like to write a blog about this, or I would like to tell this story, or whatever it is. And it's always writing that is the medium that I choose to do that through.
I'm the opposite to you, you know. I have always loved writing. It's so funny. I was in a cab the other day, and my Addison Lee driver was like, one South American man, yeah, cheeky man, and he was bantering. His English wasn't great, and he was asking me questions. So he had already asked me, "What do you do?" And just because, as I said, like his English wasn't necessarily great and whatever, and he was really old. I think that his hearing wasn't great either. So he kept everything I was saying, I had to keep repeating. So I just said, I've written a book. And on that particular day, I was doing bare book stuff anyway. So then I guess he didn't catch it, because then later he asked me again about like what I do for a job and what I do for a living. And I was like, oh, I'm an author, I'm a writer. I wrote this book and I had it on me. I had the proof copy on me and I showed it to him. And he was like, oh my God. And he was like taking the book and like looking at it, and he like was like, Keisha, this scared, and like it was so sweet. He gave me back the proof, and he asked me such an insightful question. He was like, did you always keep a diary? And I was like, yeah, that was something that my mum always made sure of. Like, she always bought me a diary every Christmas. It was always in a stocking. And she was really serious about me writing my diary every day. Sometimes it felt like a little bit of a chore as a child, but often it felt like a moment to like reminisce on the day, to feel excited again about like whatever I did. I went to the park with my cousins, or I might have come back from a weekend of staying at my cousin's house. So like I'm writing about my whole weekend over 2 days in the space in the diary. But I've always enjoyed writing, and now as an adult, of course, like there's a level of discipline to like keep a journal, and to keep your diary up to date. Even like writing a long email, that is not work related. All of those things feel really taxing. And they do feel like that for me as well. But at the end of it, or at a point whilst doing it, even though I've had to drag my feet to do it, it always feels like this is just so perfect. This is perfect. Like, I feel like I am truly expressing myself. I think I get really tongue-tied sometimes. I get like nervous or anxious that I'm not communicating what I'm trying to say properly when I'm speaking. And writing has always been the medium for me that is like just best for me, for my temperament, best for me to really express and say what it is that I'm trying to say. And I often look back at the things I've written. So I think that for me anyway, I don't know about other people, but for me, I often look back at like, I don't know, when I was like 22 or 23, and I just think, oh, like I was doing dumb things. I was in a silly relationship. I like had silly beliefs and all of that. And at points in time, every so often, I will read back what I was writing at that time, whether it was a journal or even like I always have notebooks and stuff, but I will read them back, and I will always be struck by like how wise or like intelligent or how much I have to say. I remember a friendship that I decided to end some years ago. In that friendship, I would describe the person as quite confrontational. And the person was like any, like issue that we had that came up in our friendship, they would always want to talk about it in person. And it felt really confrontational, like so uncomfortably confrontational every single time. And prime reason because speaking is not my best way of communicating. Anyway, when I decided that I was like done with this friendship, not interested, I was like really assertive about, no, I'm going to email you. I'm going to send you an email. I'm not like doing this, speaking on the phone, speaking in person. I'm going to send you an email. And I don't know why I read back the email I sent the other day. I don't know why I decided to do that. And I was so struck by like how detailed and like I really articulated everything that I had felt throughout the friendship. And yeah, I say all of that to say that writing has been so central to my life. It's not good for me to put down.
And like, yeah, that point about it's not good to put down, that resonated with me still. Because I think when I've tried to put it down, it feels like, I call it like, writer's block for me feels like creative blue balls. It feels painful when I have gone extended periods and I haven't written, and that's like might be even journaling or like just anything. I feel really blocked when I don't write. I feel really blocked creatively. So not just in my writing, but like in everything, I feel blocked when I don't write. And sometimes I'll just have to do a free write, or I don't know, just write anything so that I can free that and kind of get that, my ability to create flowing again, which is interesting. So that resonated with me. I think there's something about clarity in writing that and the truth and an inability to run away from the truth. So I think when you say things, like I said, you can backpedal on, or you can, I think there's a grace that comes with oral communication. There's a grace that you don't have to be clear. You don't have to, or you don't have to be, so even what I just did there, you can get it wrong, or you can backpedal on it, and you can whatever. Whereas when it's written down, there is an expectation that you're saying what you mean. And what you mean is your truth in it. There's an expectation from the reader, there's an expectation from me as the writer that I'm saying what I mean. That's really important to me as well in my writing. So whenever I've been commissioned to write blogs, some of them I like because I know that I'm saying what I mean. Some of them I don't like, and not because I think they're quote unquote poorly written. I don't think I've ever published a blog that would be considered poorly written, or that people would say, oh, she's a shit writer, even though they're not necessarily the best or the greatest. But for me, the discomfort comes from, this isn't what I wanted to say, this isn't what I meant, but and I'm not communicating what I wanted to say. That's where the discomfort comes from with me. And actually, I think a lot about that when you spoke about going back to old journals and I have done that recently as well. And I was reminded of my relationship to poetry, which is so funny because I'm so far from a poet at the moment. Like, at the moment, I wouldn't describe myself as a poet. And I was commissioned to do some poetry and read some poetry at a conference a few months ago. And I really enjoyed the poems. I really liked the poems that I wrote and performed. But also, I was just reminded that poetry was my entry point into this word stuff for me. And it was me communicating in metaphors and me communicating. So I'm communicating in essence, and there's less pressure for it to be like for other people to understand it. It was more about me. And when I write poetry, it's more about I'm telling my story, and people might not have the context. So that poem, my favorite poems that I've written are not necessarily the ones that I think people enjoy the most, or because people don't get what I'm saying, because it's not, they don't have the full context. So I've got a poem that I wrote about my family, which again, like, I think that's one of the favorite poems, one of my best poems I've ever written. But I know that how it would be received is like, oh, it's okay, but people don't get the context of what I'm saying. And there's something about that relationship with poetry, that ability to like hide in plain sight almost. So I can say things, and like, I know that people without the context don't know what I'm saying, or don't deep the depth behind what I'm saying. And the use of metaphors to hide behind. And that is, I think that's taken away from me in non-fiction writing particularly. So in like articles or blogs or essays, that's taken away from me. But also I think even in fiction, there is like, I have a barometer for what I think is quote unquote good writing, and there's a pressure I just don't like. I don't like that pressure. And I think imposter syndrome is so rife for me when it comes to writing. It's the one thing I think, for most things, I really understand my source to be like to the point of borderline arrogance, where it's like, oh, I'm really good at that, or like, oh, like I think as a facilitator, I don't really question, and there's lots of room for growth and development, and like I love working with people that facilitate very differently to me, so because I'm always learning and picking things up. But I'm confident in like I'm a facilitator. That's what I do. I'm good at it. I enjoy it. And I'll leave sessions and think, wow, that was really good facilitation. And yeah, these were the areas of growth and development. But overall, that was really good. I'm confident that was good facilitation, that you're continually honing that skill. Whereas writing is one of those things that some days I feel it, and then other days I'm like, why are you doing this? And I do think there's also a comparison culture that I've adopted, which is really unhealthy in my writing. So I think that there is like, and when I say comparison culture, what I mean is I will read something like, I'll read an article and I'll think, I could never write this. I could never use words in this way. And there are a few articles that I refer back to because they are that thick, that is like, how did this person write that sentence? How did they think of that? And I just know that my pen game isn't there. It's interesting.
On that point, on that very last point, I do that. But writing might be the only place where when I now sit down with my pen, I'm not possessed by, oh, the sentence that I read that XX person wrote and it was so sick, and you can't do that, boy. So you better just put this pen down, or like, it doesn't make me tentative, or it doesn't make me like Yeah, it doesn't necessarily induce anything when I'm about to now sit down and write, even if I've been wowed by someone else's writing. So a good example would be one of my favorite writers is Chimamanda. The clarity, the sharpness that that woman writes with is, I've never come across it before. I can't write like that, but it doesn't make me cower. That doesn't make me cower when it comes to my own writing endeavors. And I'm not sure what that is, because I think temperament wise, I'm far more likely to allow comparison to steal my self-belief. That is really interesting. That's an interesting revelation that has come up in us chatting about this today.
It makes me cowboy. Like, it makes me think.
Mm.
In my mind, I think of Chinua Achebe and I think about
Mm.
Chimamanda. And I think they're writers. And then I think, me, how do I open my mouth to say I'm a writer? Like, how do I? It's not that I'm comparing myself to them as like in terms of like directly saying, oh, because they can write like this and I can't. Because I write how I write in it and people can't write like me. But I think it's more, I do think, and we spoke about this briefly in the episode with Nancy, but maybe I'm a snob when it comes to literature. And I just think that there is a threshold of like quality, of what I would describe as quality and skill. So it's like, also, yeah, I think writing's one of those things that anyone can do in it. Any single one of us can like sit down and write things. Everyone in the world writes. We write every day emails, we write text messages, we put words together in written form. And it doesn't help that I'm a daughter of two writers, in it. Both my parents are writers and both my parents are phenomenal writers. My mum is genuinely one of the best writers I've ever met. And my mum's ability to like, my mum's thing's different, in it. Her pen game's different. So maybe that doesn't help. Maybe that comparison started earlier than for other people. And again, I say that as a big maybe, I don't know. But I know that I do feel that there's a threshold of expectation. And I'm just trying to move away from that, because I have been able to engage with, and we spoke about this again in the episode with Nancy, but I think there's different audiences, right, for different types of writing. Mm-hmm. And I've been able to engage with writing that isn't traditionally what I would describe as like amazing, or like they're not Chimamanda, do you know what I mean? But the stories are captivating and I'm able to engage with and gain from, and I'm just learning to be a lot less myopic in how I engage with literature. And then I think that there is the bigger umbrella of like that being clouded by whiteness, and like what I grew up thinking, how I grew up thinking like sentences were meant to be structured, or the English language is the language that I communicate in, and the language that I read in, and like what that means. And so anything that steers away or deviates a little bit from that, I'm uncomfortable.
As you've been speaking, that has been just what I've been thinking in my mind. Like, yeah, you sound like a dickhead gatekeeper, basically. What I'm thinking in my mind is when it comes to, so one of my friends said to me many years ago, and can't remember verbatim, but the essence of what he said was basically like the capacity to write a story, to take what is in your mind and to articulate it into words isn't something that everyone can do. To be able to conjure something up in your imagination and articulate that in word form is not something that everyone can do, whether that's a patience thing, a skill thing. It's just something that not everyone can do. Then I go on to think about world of experiences that we all have, the different trajectories, the nuances, the layers, the textures of all of our different lives as writers. And I just think that it is completely impossible to have like a way or like a judgment on how things are done. I went on a little spree a few weeks ago on Amazon, and I ordered bare urban novels that I read when I was young, around the time that I was just before and around the time that I was writing Keisha the Sket. Some titles that I remember from back then. These are written by like people who are like from the roads out in America, and they're telling their stories, and they're telling stories that are inspired by where they're from. They're not writing like Chimamanda. They're definitely not writing. They're not even writing like me. But they're still telling a story, and the stories that they were telling is why I am where I am today. I can't take anything away from that. You've done what you do, and I don't know who else it might have inspired, or what. It's obvious they've inspired one another in it, as people from the hood that are able to articulate stories from what they've conjured up in their imaginations. They've taken bits and pieces from what they're seeing around them. They've inspired the ones that can do that in that context. And then you've also inspired me in my own context, far, far quay over where I am. They're writers, man. Yeah.
No, 100%. And I think that it's 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 interesting because, like I said earlier, I think I hold myself to a different standard to what I hold others to. I was listening to Morrison, but a rapper from Newham, and he had the Daily Duppy that came out a couple of weeks ago. And I used to really like Morrison. I don't know why, because I don't even think he's not the type of rapper that I bare like, but I just liked Morrison. I don't know why, maybe because he's white, and he's sick. I don't know why, but I've always liked Morrison. Anyway, his Daily Duppy came out a couple of weeks ago. Listened to it, and I saw people posting it. Listened to it, I thought, oh, I don't like this, or don't think it's great. And then listened to it again yesterday, and I was like, he's just saying things like his ability to like, and that there is such a depth to what I see from what he's saying. Like, I just think there's just a proper depth in it, in like the ability to translate our stories, so our communities that are actually really not mainstream, and there actually isn't much literature, there actually isn't much that explains or describes the communities that we have grown up in. And I think, yeah, so I think when I think of them, and one of the main things I was thinking to myself when I was listening to it is, we need to study this. Like, this is social commentary. This is like important. These are like, it's important that the man them are documenting their stories in this way. And then I think about the mediums by which we have been able to historically and traditionally document our stories. So rap being one of them, hip hop, grime, now drill, like the different ways in which we use those mediums, and that feels comfortable. And then the way that it feels more uncomfortable maybe when I've read stories that people are breaking the rules, or quote unquote rules, and not necessarily writing in the ways that historically would be deemed acceptable, and that discomfort, what that means for me, and how that fits for me. And sometimes I think that's really well executed, and sometimes it makes me feel cringe. And just like navigating and understanding that as a consumer, and then how that impacts my writing, like what I want to look. So it's less the stories that I want to tell and more how I'm telling them. There is a big discomfort, like there's a big discomfort in terms of, like, I think maybe the version of the if there's different rooms, or if there's different types of writers, the room that I want to be in, and not feeling good enough to be in that room. But it's like, oh, I can be in this room, but then I don't really want to be in that room. And it is, I think it's interesting. And I think it does come back to different consumers expect or want different things, and different people. There will be people that will never fuck with what I have to say. There will be people that are not interested in the stories that I'm telling. And I need to find comfort in that, and peace in the fact that that's okay, that's fine. It doesn't invalidate the types of stories that I want to tell, or the ways that I want to tell them. And then there's also something about those standards that I hold about, like, books that I read and the words that I consume. There's something about offering or affording a grace to myself, in that I write like me in it. I'm never gonna write like Chimamanda or Chinua Achebe or all of the greats that I love. I'm not writing to write like them. I'm writing to write like me. And finding out what writing like me, what that is, finding out what I want to say, finding out how I want to play with words. And there's a vulnerability in that I'm just not used to. I'm used to knowing what I like, or knowing my identity, whereas I think my identity in writing is something that I'm still very, very, very much figuring out.
I think that where you've landed is really, really fair. Yeah, I like the point that you make I've always felt like that. I've always loved stories, innit? And I think it's taken me like some time and maturity to understand that in all of the different mediums, so, you know, different music types and whatever, people are telling stories, and that stories are important, and they give us a space to relate, and they give texture to life, and they give like escape and all of that. And so again, I just don't think in terms of like even what you talk about on in terms of like standards. So like there being a standard, I don't know how helpful that is, because then we essentially we gatekeep stories then, because they've got to be accessible to other people if they're going to serve that purpose of, you know, giving texture to life and providing escapism and blah 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 blah. But yeah, I do love a story, and I love writing. It's so important to me. It's tiring and it takes a lot.
Yeah, the gatekeeping is something I'm going to think a lot more about, and not just think about it in terms of when I'm doing it or when I'm engaging with people's writing like that, but how it limits my own path, how it limits my own freedom to just say what I want to say. Helpful food for thought.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that. But yeah, all right then, guys. Thank you for listening, and catch you in the next one.
Thanks for listening, guys.
I can't come here and die. I can't come here and lose. Got all this shit on my mind. Like what the fuck I'ma do? Work ain't paid me in time. My brain just ripping my mood. O2 just cut off my line.